Cinderella's story is known today as a beautiful fairy tale of magic and hope, but buried beneath the glittering glass slipper lies a past that is far darker than most could imagine. Before it became a tale for children, it was whispered as a warning, a legend rooted in fear, curses, and witch trials that haunted villages across Europe. To uncover the truth is to peel back the layers of time and step into a world where fairy tales were not meant to comfort, but to frighten and control. What we call Cinderella was once a story of blood, betrayal, and a pact with forces that people were too afraid to name aloud. Long before Disney's animated ballrooms and fairy godmothers, Europe in the Middle Ages was gripped by terror. Witch hunts raged across towns and villages. Women who stood out, who were different, or who simply crossed the wrong person could be branded as witches and dragged before courts that had already decided their fate. It was in this climate of suspicion that the bones of the Cinderella tale first appeared, told as a cautionary whisper about a girl cursed by her own stepmother and bound by supernatural forces. Children heard it not as a bedtime story, but as a dark reminder of what happens when envy and curses take root inside the home. The figure of the wicked stepmother did not come from harmless imagination. It was inspired by the countless accusations leveled against women who were accused of poisoning children, casting spells, and consorting with the devil. In village folklore, stepmothers were often blamed when misfortune struck, whether it was illness, famine, or sudden death. In these whispers, Cinderella's suffering at the hands of her stepmother was not just cruelty, it was sorcery. The girl's misfortune was seen as the result of a curse that robbed her of her family and trapped her in servitude. The glass slipper that we now associate with magic and romance was once described as a charm of binding, something that carried the weight of witchcraft and fate. But there was more to the story than envy between women. The tale carried echoes of real tragedies from the era of witch trials. In some villages, girls were singled out for their beauty or innocence, and neighbors claimed that they had been blessed or cursed by witches. To explain misfortunes, communities told stories of enchanted girls who were destined either for greatness or for death. In this environment, the world made its current-day symbolism a story of survival. It warned families to beware of stepmothers, to beware of curses, and above all, to fear the power of the unseen. As the tale spread across Europe, each region added its own layer of darkness. In parts of Germany, Cinderella, or Aschenputtel, was not aided by a fairy godmother, but by the spirit of her dead mother, who sent birds to punish her tormentors. In France, she was persecuted by women who were described in chilling terms as witches. In Italy, versions of the story told of shoes that were not made of glass, but of dangerous, enchanted materials. And in some Eastern European versions, the ball was not a grand party, but a sinister gathering where the prince himself was believed to test the power of spells. The consistent thread across these variations was not joy, but fear. The tale was a mirror of the world people lived in, one where curses and dark bargains seemed just as real as the hunger and plague that stalked the land. When we look closely at the symbols within the story, their original meaning becomes clearer. The ashes that cover Cinderella's body are not simply dirt from the fireplace, but a sign of mourning and humiliation. Ashes were often used in rituals to ward off evil or to mark someone as touched by misfortune. Her transformation from ash to beauty carried the weight of resurrection, something unnatural and threatening to those who feared the influence of magic. The slipper, fragile and binding, was seen as a test not of love, but of fate itself. To wear it meant to accept a destiny that could not be escaped. The ball, instead of being a joyful dance, resembled the gatherings of nobility, where alliances were made and innocence was often exploited. None of it was meant to comfort, it was meant to warn. The rise of witch trials gave these elements even sharper edges. In the 15th and 16th centuries, thousands of women were burned or drowned after being accused of witchcraft. Their stories were twisted into tales for children, stripped of names but heavy with symbolism. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were echoes of those fears, women who might use spells to harm the innocent. But the darker implication was that even the innocent, like Cinderella herself, could not escape the shadow of curses. The story became a reminder that no one was truly safe, not even the pure and beautiful. It was this unease that made the story powerful enough to spread across centuries. Yet as grim as it was, the tale also served another purpose. It was used to control. Children who heard it were taught obedience, patience, and silence in the face of suffering. The idea that a girl could rise from the ashes only through endurance reinforced the social rules of the time. Women were warned not to rebel, not to fight, but to wait for salvation that might never come. In this way, the dark origins of Cinderella were less about magic and more about power. Power wielded by those who created and repeated the story. It kept fear alive, and fear was a powerful tool. By the 17th century, collectors of folklore like Charles Perrault began to reshape the tale. Perrault's version softened some of the horror, but traces of the old darkness remained. The fairy godmother replaced the spirit of the dead mother, yet the unsettling idea of a supernatural figure granting wishes lingered. The slipper became glass, fragile and pure, masking its earlier connection to binding charms. The ball was turned into a romantic event, though in reality, such gatherings often hid exploitation and political maneuvering. Perrault's Cinderella was a polished mask, but anyone who scratched the surface could still see the shadows underneath. The Brothers Grimm, collecting their version in Germany, stripped away some of Perrault's elegance and reintroduced darker elements. In their telling, the stepsisters cut off pieces of their feet to fit the slipper, and birds pecked out their eyes as punishment. Here again, the violence of older times bled into the story, refusing to be erased. It was as though Europe's collective memory would not allow Cinderella to be told without a reminder of the cruelty and blood that birthed it. The Grimms were not inventing darkness, they were preserving it. The most chilling aspect of all is that the story's endurance suggests that people needed it. In societies where witch trials destroyed families, where curses were believed to linger in every shadow, stories like Cinderella gave shape to fear. They offered explanations for suffering and loss, even if those explanations were cruel. They told people that misfortune could be blamed on a stepmother, that curses had patterns, that fate could be recognized in something as simple as a slipper. In a world of chaos, these tales were not just stories. They were survival maps, guiding people through the terror of the unknown. And yet, as time passed, society changed. Witch trials ended. Science began to challenge superstition, and the world demanded stories that comforted, rather than terrified. Cinderella was reshaped again, this time into a tale of hope. But even in this new form, the shadows linger. The ashes still cling to her skin, the slipper still binds her fate, and the memory of curses and witch trials still hides in the margins. Every time we tell the story, we are speaking an echo of the fears that once ruled Europe. So when we look at the glittering ball gown, the pumpkin carriage, and the glass slipper, we should remember what they once meant. They were not symbols of joy.